Please welcome to the stage, in conversation with Grit Daily's executive editor, Jordan French, Huckleberry Insurance co-founder and CEO, Bryan O'Connell, Xare co-founder and CEO, Padmini Gupta, and Capitolis founder and CEO, Gil Mandelzis.
Big round of applause for Boss with Telm. Been a hell of an MC. And Boss, here, let me check. Boss, good friend of mine, hell of an MC. Let me do a quick introduction. Big round of applause for Gil's here with Capitolis. Gil, welcome, have a seat. Thank you. Padmini Gupta is here with Xare. We'll unpack where that name's from. And again, Huckleberry, second time, no less the pleasure. Bryan O'Connell, have a seat.
Good to be here.
And let's jump right in. We got a little bit of ambient noise, but it's really good to see you all. Big round of applause too for the Web Summit Collision team that's backstage. Bryan, I know at the venture stage, and the team here, Jay. They'll never get enough praise for what they do. So Jordan French here, executive editor at Grit Daily, and we cover a lot of news, a lot of startup news. So that's how we're going to start this today. I know we're going to talk about some really interesting concepts, really unique founder stories here that I think you'll be able to pull away for your existing businesses, for funding purposes, and all of those of you who are just starting out or restarting out. But on to the news. Padmini, I'm going to start with you. It'll let you unpack your company. You had some news to share with the audience.
Sure, so...
No pun intended, of course.
So actually, this week we'll hit over $1 billion shared on our platform, and that's a major milestone for us.
Wow, congrats on that. And the company is?
Xare.
But like a year old.
Yeah, we're about 14 months old, and it's big for us because it's actually the fastest that we've ever gotten to $1 billion, or actually I think most people.
Yep, and as the name implies, Xare
allows anyone, anywhere to share their financial access with people that they love and care about. Or maybe don't love, but really care about.
Cool, I think we should all do these with a smile. Next, though, Bryan as well. Bryan, you had some news to share with this audience.
Indeed.
Fire away.
Some Toronto-related news, actually. So, at Huckleberry, our priority is to meet our customers where they are and to embed our insurance within other products. And to that end, there's a fantastic Toronto company called Nula. They're a super app for small business customers, allowing these folks to manage all of their business in one place and to carefully curate different services. And we're pleased to announce that later this summer, we're going to be fully integrated with Nula so that Nula customers will be able to buy insurance from Huckleberry in just a couple of touches. So very, very exciting for the team.
Awesome. Big round of applause for all the Toronto startups that are out there, including Nula, which is partnered with your company, Huckleberry. I think why that's important, it lays some foundation for what we'll cover a little bit later about seeing opportunities to adjust things a bit, including on the marketing. And last but not least, Gil Mandelzis is here with Capitolis. Really fascinating business that actually affects all your lives. We'll do as well as we can to unpack what they do. But you had some news out not too long ago on the funding side, Gil.
Yeah, we did. We raised our, I don't know if people can hear, but we raised our series.
Your mic, pick your mic up. Yeah, there you go.
Can people hear now?
Oh, yes.
Perfect. So, we finished raising our Series D, $110 million, by leading fintech investors, joining banks and the largest investment firms in the world that are already on our capital.
Yeah, congrats on that. $110 million round is no small feat. And I think, speaking of small feats, just because it's so illustrative, right? And I use the word intimidating, Bill, like what your business does. Let me just give a half a sentence for the audience. It's sort of like a matchmaker, a marketplace for capital that might be sitting on the balance sheets of big companies or huge institutional investors. And then the other end, some of the biggest banks in the world who want to deploy that capital for including everyday services, which sounds daunting, right? I use the word intimidating. I think take us back, because we'll do this with Padmini and Bryan as well. You weren't always who you were as this fintech founder with lots of connections, for example, on those two cohorts. You were once a pedestrian.
I was definitely a pedestrian. One would argue I still am to a certain extent. But no, we started, this is not my first startup. I started the first one in 2000 in fintech, in financial services. Certainly what we're doing right now, which is really trying to make the whole capital markets world much more safe and robust, working in close partnership with the banks and large institutions, I couldn't have done as a 30-year-old entrepreneur at the time. So this is much more complex and requires reputation, experience, and connections. But my first company, I knew nothing, and with a lot of grit and trials and errors, we're able to be successful in that and build into the relationship that and reputation that we have starting the second and third.
Certainly, and we'll talk about grit. We'll talk about the relationship between people who might join a team for sure here. But the groundings of Capitolis actually start because it's so relevant today. I believe we're in a technical recession, right, Bryan? Something close to that, very likely. It feels like that from our last talk on the venture stage with some compression in multiples. But Gil, the groundings of Capitolis was in the last recession, the financial crisis,
Absolutely.
2008.
Yeah, so on the back of the financial crisis, regulators all over the world wanted to make sure that banks do not need to be bailed out anymore because we're all paying the price. As a result of that, they have limited the capital and exposure that banks can have. It's a great thing. We just went through a pandemic. Not a single bank went bust, so that's great. But at the same time, there are services in the wholesale banking world that only the large banks can offer. Big technology investments takes billions of dollars, tens of years to develop. No fintech can disrupt that. So the problem is, the good news is the world is safe. The problem is all of us, through our 401ks and otherwise, don't have access to the best services. At the same time, there is tons of capital out there, and we're bringing the two together through a marketplace such that all of us still can get, or institutions can get the best services from the largest banks, but they're funded through capital that comes from any institutional investor out there. So the world is safer, there is less leverage in the system, and much more available to all of us, either directly or through institutions servicing us.
Yeah, it turns out that big banks need their own Airbnb, if you will, or platform
Exactly.
to interact, and you provide that. And much like Airbnb in a retail-facing setting or consumer-facing setting is almost simple. It's obvious in hindsight. What you did, Padmini, with Xare was also now obvious in hindsight. Share that origin story.
So we'd actually started a migrant financial services platform. And what we realized is two things. One is the remittances industry has not been disrupted for 60 plus years. It's ripe for it. And then the second thing is that cash during COVID became a 4-letter word. Said, why don't we actually build a platform that actually takes those two problems away, allowing migrants to share their money. Then what we realized is that during periods of stress, especially, actually everyone shares, right? On a daily basis, we share with our kids, we share with our family. During crises, we share with our neighbors, we share with our communities. So let's open this up to everyone. And what a phenomenal decision that was, because this year alone, I told you just about the $1 billion, but what I didn't tell you is we have now 1.7 million users on our platform, and that is just 1 year of growth. So people like the idea, I guess.
A huge number, and if you didn't hear that, literally in 14 months, grown from literally none, zero on the platform, to 1.7 million, a billion issued, I think is the right term to describe for credit. And just to repeat this back to you and really unpack this story, really we're working on a slightly different business. It was really money transfer for migrants, but this was really a different problem that you saw right in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah, because what we don't realize every day is that all financial products were built for income earners, but actually 60%, only 60% of the world doesn't have an income, right? And so people that have an income have to figure out how they're going to share their money with the rest of the people that depend on them. And the amount that is spent by that 60% that doesn't have an income, it's $25 trillion that's unaddressed, and that's where we're actually playing.
Yeah, and speaking of unaddressed markets, I'll bring Bryan in this. There's some analogies, but it's almost obvious now in hindsight what Huckleberry does with insurance products for SMEs. Could you share more for the uninitiated, Bryan?
Sure. So we essentially started as a marketplace for small business insurance. So you can think of us like a kayak. Go to our website, 5 to 7 minutes, and you have an insurance policy in hand. It was a great experience for the end user. But I'm sure this is probably top of mind for a lot of people here now with capital, like frankly, not being as easy to access. It's kind of forcing us all to make, in many ways, better decisions. So we were previously spending a lot on advertising, driving users to our website, which was maybe not as sustainable in a less capital fluid environment. So our business is now much more focused on embedded insurance, right? So on meeting our customers where they are. And what this means in practice is essentially an API layer that anyone who has a large existing base of customers can implement. So Nuala being the prime example, we have several others that we're really excited to announce in the coming months. And the advantage of this for the end user is it's a great experience, right? So you're checking out and you just want to add insurance and you click a button and you're good to go. But from an economics point of view, if you think about it, instead of us having to now pay up front for users, we can instead be a lot more creative with how we're acquiring users and with that all-important customer acquisition cost. It can be a rev share over time. It can be a fee per quote, which is ultimately much more sustainable as a business.
Certainly, and this challenge you were confronted with, though, the genesis of that was when you're fundraising. It was that investors weren't necessarily willing to invest in the way you marketed yourself prior.
I think this is probably something. I wouldn't say it was that overt, but I think it's probably something that everyone is running into now, right? I mean, startups really are a simple game. It's your customer acquisition cost, or your long-term value minus your customer acquisition cost. Hopefully that's a good equation, and hopefully that becomes a good equation and pays back in a year is best in class. 2 years is probably okay, right? And that's really what, no matter what kind of business you're in, that's kind of what it all boils down to. And I think just like everyone is a lot more focused on that CAC number, right? Like turn the clock back 2 years. It's probably okay to have 5-year payback. Probably okay to be working on other things with your business. I think any recession has really kind of focuses minds, which is why we've seen some of the best businesses of the last decade, the most iconic businesses of all. Many of them have emerged during a recession.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's that scarcity, right, induces resourcefulness. As you were. I think just to really distill your point, you might have a really successful, awesome business, and then one day, as I referenced the book, perhaps some of you out there heard of it, Who Moved My Cheese? It's a real book, actually. Go look this up. We talked about this backstage, but in your case, it didn't so much, but there's a bigger and broader opportunity to do things a little bit differently, just to repeat it back to you, with embedded insurance. Now, might not be a lot of startups with literally that exact problem, but looking for partners might be that avenue,
right.
Bryan.
Yeah, and I think there's multiple analogs in the industry, like just API first businesses, right? Businesses that are embedded within others. It's a great way to acquire users because you're ultimately not paying for those users, and whether that be like a check or even someone like a Plaid, those can be powerful business models. So, I think anyone sort of starting out, I'd encourage to sort of think in those terms and a little bit, because often distribution is one of the most important things that you'll do. So what's a really effective and cheap way you can do that?
Certainly, especially when you can bring your marketing costs from something significant down to practically zero.
That's zero, or most importantly in these times, not expending marketing dollars up front, right? So instead, you're paying as the money comes in, which when capital is more scarce, can make a big difference on your burn and the sustainability of your business.
Right, certainly. And Gil, partnerships are often outward looking, but including in a business like yours, they might be important, but it's also equally important to look inward, right? And like company values, for example, you use the word purpose. Could you share more what you mean by that as it relates to Capitolis?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everything that we're doing is driven by purpose, 100% of what we do. First of all, we believe what we do is really important for the world. Having a sound financial system that works for everybody is driving us. But also every aspect of what we do, we're very outspoken about any social issues We've been very outspoken around Roe v. Wade, gun violence, Islamophobia that exists, unfortunately, and racism. Sustainability. When you visit our office, you will wipe your hands with, we'll use vegan soap and bamboo products. So we're trying to be very intentional, very, very purposeful in everything we do. I would say for all of us, we live in a world where people like us are put on stages and people listen to us as opposed to doctors and poets and teachers. And we view that there is a tremendous opportunity and obligation for all of us to use this platform to lead by example. Politics is way too important to be left to politicians, and policy is too important to be left just to policymakers. So we have to participate. We're very purposeful in everything that we do. Again, as I said, starting with very passionately understanding and protecting the financial system for all of us, but in every other aspect of what we do.
Yeah, certainly, and it seems that whether people agree with that ethos or not, that's induced or created a certain curiosity, Gil. And just as an example, we'll tease out for the audience's purposes. You were interested, for example, in potentially supporting or at least seeing if there's a way to benefit some of your customers and banks with the Ukraine crisis going on.
Definitely.
More of aggression, if you will.
Definitely.
Yes.
So as soon as the invasion, the despicable invasion by Russia into Ukraine happened, banks approached us to reduce their exposure to the Russian ruble. Because we have the community and we're working with all of them, we work with them, and within 3 days we've done the first compression run that reduces that risk, and we're doing that twice a month since then. But immediately we took 50% of that revenues and contributed it to Ukrainian causes. Also, the month of June is a month where every year we're giving 10% of our transactional revenues to charitable causes that are selected by our employees and our customers. So we're leveraging each such opportunity when it comes. We definitely did not want to profit from the devastation that exists in the Ukraine. We leverage that opportunities for both raising awareness and then also supporting them, giving back to the community.
Yeah, certainly, and to really distill that point, Gil, that backbone that the company has around its philosophy and purpose drove a certain curiosity in something, and it really developed into a business opportunity. Again, the clear example being reducing risk, counterparty risk around the Russian ruble.
100%.
Because of your purpose and being curious about,
100%.
hey, how can I help people in this part of the world?
Absolutely, and I would also say that especially times like this, we are going into definitely slow down, perhaps a recession. Purpose-driven companies, purpose-driven employees. I mean, we publish our values online, and we're saying for everyone, this is not a job. You want a job, go elsewhere, and it's great. You want to work with us, where it's not a job. You have to have deep-seated values. We're getting the right employees, we're getting the support of our investors, and these are the people with which you could actually go through very tough times. We'll go together because it's bigger than just a salary and options and so on.
Yeah, certainly, especially when in some cases, maybe not at Capitolis, but elsewhere, stocks and options can be worthless or less valued. Purpose becomes even more so of a driver why people choose to work in a job. Padmini, I'm going to bring you right into this in relationship to that very word, which is focus. You don't get where you are without focusing specifically on something. You also can't do it alone. Inquiring minds want to know, how do you recruit a team at this stage where people are just finding out about Xare, you have some success, there's a clear purpose, but a team needs to be built? Padmini.
The best way I know how is to actually tell the story, right? And everyone that I've recruited knows the story about how we started Xare, and that's brought them in, but also when they work every day, they realize that they're actually working towards that purpose. And so we've actually been lucky enough to hire from some of the best fintechs out there, really high growth fintechs out there. And being as small as we were, right, when we started. So I think purpose makes such a difference, and your ability to tell a story your story makes people live your purpose.
Certainly, and as for a contemporary issue, Bryan, you shared a little bit backstage that I definitely want this audience to know. Things perhaps might be getting easier from a recruiting standpoint. Your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think anyone starting a seed or even a pre-seed company nowadays is in pretty good space. You know, provided you can raise the capital, there's going to be a lot of great talent out there. Not necessarily because of layoffs, but just because the big, huge opportunities at the Googles and wherever the Facebooks of the world are now a little bit less attractive. So you're going to have just great people out there, for that reason. But building on the previous points, it's also very important what you do when you get these people in, right? And I would say having a clear story is important, but also having a very clear set of values and living those values. So we did a terrible job of this in the early days, but recently we've become much more intentional and not just putting them on a whiteboard somewhere, but actually when you interview, make sure you're hitting each one of those values and how will this person react to those values within the organization.
And so that's actionable because the vulnerability helps so much with these audiences. You said earlier on you did a terrible job with that. Can you unpack what you mean by that more, Bryan?
Yeah, I mean, I think whenever you're starting a company in the early days, you generally no clue what you're doing, so it's the first time you've done it and you're going to be making mistakes left, right, and center. And if you're coming from a business or a technology background, you may sort of think that things like values or mission or vision, all that sort of stuff is less important and fluffy, it won't drive the business, when in reality it's the only thing that will drive the business and everything else will flow down for that, So we learned that the hard way. I would strongly advise anyone out there getting started right now that should be something you can iterate on for sure, and you should iterate on it, but make sure you're defining those early on and, frankly, hiring and firing based on them.
And I'm hearing the enthusiasm, and I'll tease you with this a bit and repeat it back to you. It's that you almost wish you could start over with a launch an early stage.
I wouldn't say I wish I
company.
started over because I'm incredibly excited about what we're building and have the most amazing team to do it, and adding great people to that team every day. But I think it's an exciting time to start a business right now. All of the frankly idiocy of the last couple of years has gone away. The tourists have gone home. You can do a lot with a little, and especially with the increased globalization that was driven by COVID. If you need to access a particular skill in small quantities, that's much easier to do than it was even when we got started 4 years ago.
Right, and that brings us back full circle with some of our first points with Padmini and with Gil, and that there are often advantages to being early on, a lot more nimbleness in there, and because Capitolis effectively started after the sort of remnants of the last recession. Gil, I'll give you the last word.
Well, the last word about what?
Your advice to the startups out there
I
on
just
how to
think
differentiate
it
themselves.
boils down to building real businesses. And it was true 10 years ago, and it's true 5 years ago. I think people got a little confused. You go back to the basics. It needs to have real value. It needs to be a real business. If you have cash, or where you have cash, preserve it, use it wisely. Look at your business model. Being in the right industry doesn't mean that you have the right business model, and it sounds like that's the pivot that you've done, and it's very successful. And I think to Bryan's point, it's the values are, they cannot be overstated how important values and culture and purpose are, and we have a great opportunity to truly change the world, and I hope we're going to all take it.
And that's a great opportunity. Sound advice. Big round of applause for this crew that's joined us here. Awesome fintechs, great stories. Gil Mandelzis, Capitolis, Padmini Gupta from Xare, and Bryan O'Connell, the one and only Bryan O'Connell from Huckleberry. I'm Jordan French, executive editor at Grit Daily. That's all the time that we have. Enjoy the rest of your collision. Until next time.
Good stuff.